Years ago, I was out very late in Brooklyn at a restaurant whose name I was too drunk to catch. I arrived there with a clutch of people who had lingered until closing at a publishing party nearby. I wasn't particularly young, but I was still new to this world of writing and people who cared about it, and a little starstruck by most of the people in attendance. I think I was hoping their status as official literary figures, real writers, real editors, might rub off on me. One of them was someone I'll call a powerful literary man. We had never spoken, and I was no one of any importance, but he sat down next to me. We ordered drinks. I don't remember what we talked about, if we really talked at all. The only memory I have crystallizes at the moment I became aware of a hand stroking the inside of my right thigh, under my dress. I turned and looked at the powerful literary man, who, seated beside me, was the only one eligible to be owner of the hand. His half-crouch indicated that indeed, yes, it was he stroking my inner thigh without invitation. He smiled at me. I think I remember this is the part that shames me, smiling back. I have no explanation except to say that ever since I was a child, it's the tic I've had in awkward situations. I smile, or even laugh, to smooth something over. I looked back around the table. No one betrayed any sign of having noticed anything. After silently reviewing my options, I excused myself and went to the bathroom, and then I left. As we get our bearings in this new post-Weinstein age, a lot of women have spent their time returning to experiences like this one, holding them up to the light, considering what we might have missed. The difference between that night and many of the stories being reported these days is obvious, and leaps out quickly. It's the similarities that are trickier. The most arresting thing about Harvey Weinstein, for me, was how methodical he was, how consistent in modus operandi. When he decided to go after a woman, the call from a talent agent to arrange the meeting, the reassuring female assistant in the lobby, the hotel room door closing, the bathrobe, the incongruous request for a massage. There was a ritual sameness to these stories, one that said to us, this was a result of consideration and planning, of practice. This treating of the hunt like a craft, the carefulness of it, is one mark of what we often call a predator. People like that word because of its certainty, the way it rules on the case all by itself. A predator naturally lives outside the herd, and because of that, he can be very easy to ostracize. The shaming, the firing, the possible criminal prosecution, all of that seems a logical consequence for predators. Now the word comes up everywhere, and many of the cases are easy. Weinstein, Roy Moore, reportedly chasing teenagers around an Alabama mall, Russell Simmons, accused of taking women up to penthouses and keeping them there against their will. But then there are the other instances when the behavior is unquestionably wrong and invasive, the consequences are justified, and yet the word predator doesn't quite comfortably apply. There are all sorts of men who do all sorts of things they should not be doing, but who believe themselves exempt from this moment because, well, they're not that bad. That powerful literary man, it occurs to me, could read this sort of essay and not think, not once, that the word predator might apply to him. In ecology, a predator is an animal that kills and eats other animals, and the threat it poses is relatively clear-cut. There is very little ambiguity when the mountain lion eviscerates the rabbit, or the leopard rips apart the gazelle. A scientist, of course, might point out that from the standpoint of the whole ecosystem, a predator is necessary, it has a role to play in balancing populations, in preserving biological diversity. But when people talk about human predators, they're looking at them from the standpoint of the gazelle. In 1981, early in his first term, Ronald Reagan stood before the International Association of Chiefs of Police and railed about utopian presumptions about human nature in what he characterized as the age of the human predator. He liked to carve the world into good and evil this way, conjuring the criminal as an irredeemable cancer on society, evil as a matter of his nature rather than his situation. As a former actor, he knew precisely how to manipulate human emotions, claiming that crime was a problem of the human heart, and it is there we must look for answers. Democrats, chafing under the accusation that they were soft on crime, eventually picked up similar language. Hillary Clinton, in a 1996 speech supporting her husband's 1994 anti-crime bill, famously referred to a certain type of young person as a super predator, a word coined by the political scientist John J. DiIulio Jr., who predicted that the nation's inner cities would produce a generation of radically impulsive, brutally remorseless youngsters. The word is now widely acknowledged to have had racist overtones, and in the last election cycle Clinton half apologized for using it. She caught a break too, as the predator label drifted away and stuck to her opponent instead, since more than a dozen women came forward to accuse President Trump of having groped them, and much worse, headlines across the media have labeled him predator-in-chief. But outside the question of racial bias in identifying evil people, and policy arguments about how to deal with them, what few appear to question is the notion that there are people who are just fundamentally dangerous. We are, even in the face of our own dismay, fascinated by them. To Catch a Predator aired for 3 seasons on MSNBC. True crime has of late been a highbrow obsession, making a kind of intellectual game out of trying to detect a gleam of murder in Robert Durst's placid expression on HBO's The Jinx. The fantasy of the predator is that they are always watching us, always hunting, always about to strike. We watch them in turn because we have a fantasy of outsmarting them, of turning the tables. The rhetoric of the predator has been wrapped up for so long with a brutal reading of human nature, a Darwinian vision of hunter and game, and cold, remorseless victimization. But what about those who harm other people carelessly, thoughtlessly, drunkenly, ignorant of the consequences? In life, these people seem harder to avoid than the absolutely evil ones. They are a strange reminder that words like predatory were used to refer to people before they were used to classify animals. The Latin root of predator is not, as you might assume, the word for hunt, venere. It's actually praeter, to plunder. Which is to say, to take what you have already conquered, by right, like a pirate taking a ship's treasure. I don't know, and never will, what that powerful literary man was thinking. I never spoke to him directly again. I have tried to assume that he was just drunk, or just flirting, or just doing all of the things that fall short of predation. I have joked about this, in the sardonic way that women have of joking about sexist or uncomfortable encounters, the humorous pose that helps us get through all of it. And when I acted to stop him, it stopped. There was no chase, no lure into a more private area, no cover-up. None of what I have always thought of as the predator's hallmarks. Nothing worth ruining anyone's life over. Nothing worth lumping this person in with the worst offenders. But then, recently, as this memory asserted itself, certain bits of context floated up from my mind. There was later a situation in which he was called upon to professionally judge my work, and he turned me down for something I was competing for. So fleeting had been our acquaintance that it never occurred to me at the time to ask myself, let alone anyone else, whether the two things were connected, whether the fact that I might one day want something from him professionally helped guide the motion of his hand. I still don't believe that was the case. But in light of everything we've learned, I keep wondering, why didn't I ask that question? Another question occurs to me. What if I told you that this party where we had all been earlier was a party that was held to honor women in publishing? That it was in part for an organization responding to the lack of women's being commissioned to write for major publications and publishing houses? That the attendance that night was dominated by the exact sort of talented, articulate young women who flock to cultural industries in their 20s and who feel the need to cultivate the mentorship of powerful men. In that sense, perhaps there was an element of a leopard in a flock of gazelles, looking around, evaluating the women as prospects. If it was predation, it wasn't the most clear-cut, the most vicious kind. But perhaps the burden shouldn't only be on the gazelles to see it that way.